Hello, welcome to the HoneyOptics YouTube channel. I'm Stephen Ballast, and in this video, I'm going to walk you through the initial setup of your HoneyOptics PTZ camera. When you first unbox your camera, you'll have the camera itself with a lens cap on, the power supply, and a remote. And the remote can be used to set up and test the camera, but probably not the primary way you'll want to control the camera in your actual production. The first thing you'll need to do to get your camera set up is to power it. And obviously the simplest way to do that is to use the included power supply. But you can also power the camera through the Ethernet port by connecting it to a PoE or Power over Ethernet capable network switch. The HoneyOptics camera requires about 9 watts, so you need to be sure your switch has the power capacity to not only supply the required power to the port you connect it to, but also has enough power for all the PoE devices attached to the switch, as many switches have a total power budget for the entire switch that can't be exceeded. Otherwise, if that budget is exceeded in any way, the switch may stop supplying power to your camera and cause it to turn off. Once you have your camera successfully powered on, the next thing we're going to do is set the camera's IP address. The most common way to configure all of the camera's settings, and also a really common way to control the camera during your production, is to do that from a computer that talks to your camera over a network. You'll need your camera and computer connected to the same network. So I'm going to connect my camera and my laptop to this switch, and the switch is connected to my network router through this third cable. Next, on your computer, download the upgrade tool from the HoneyOptics website. There's a link to this down in the description of this video. And once you are there, you'll find both a PC and Mac version available. And once that's been downloaded, I'm going to unzip the contents to a folder on my computer and launch the upgrade.exe file. When the program opens, click the search button, and as long as your computer and the camera are on the same network, it will find your camera. Right-click on it and select Config, and here's where we can set the camera's IP address. So what address should you enter? This is going to depend on the complexity of your network and your capabilities and knowledge as the network administrator. Usually, you'll want your camera to have a static IP address so that you can easily enter that IP address in other equipment that communicates with the camera. Most networks will have a DHCP server that is assigning IP addresses to devices. And on a simple network, that's usually built into the router supplied by your internet service provider. If you are able to configure the DHCP server and it allows you to bind an IP address to a device's MAC address, that's probably the most proper way to do this. You would use the MAC address found here to configure a static IP address in your DHCP server. And then on the config page, set the mode to DHCP. What that will do is when the camera asks for an IP address from the DHCP server, it will always be assigned the address you configured in the DHCP server for it. So in that way, you'll always know the IP address of the camera. If that completely went over your head and maybe you're not a networking guru, let's look at a simpler way to do it. On your PC, open a command prompt and type ipconfig and press enter. This is going to list your computer's network settings, and in it, we can find your computer's IP address, the subnet mask, and default gateway. The subnet mask and default gateway here transfer directly as is into the camera's configuration. So in the upgrade tool, copy those entries directly from your computer. Don't necessarily use what I'm entering here because your network may be slightly different than mine. Use the information from your computer. Now we need to choose an IP address for the camera. The first 3 numbers in the address need to be the same as your default gateway. And the last number needs to be a unique number on your network between 0 and 255. If your network only has a handful of computers on it, then you're probably safe just entering a high number here, for example 200. So for me that would be 192.168.5.200. But what we're banking on here is that as our DHCP server hands out IP addresses, With only a few devices on the network, it's never going to reach 200, and we won't have an IP address conflict. But that still is a possibility. So if possible, one thing you can do to keep this from happening is if you have access to your DHCP server's configuration, we can set the IP address range that it hands out. So if we limit the range to say 5 to 199, then we know that we'll never have a conflict on any addresses that we set manually for our cameras that are above 200. Once you have those settings entered in the upgrade tool, press Set, and what will happen is your camera will reboot on its own, and in a minute we'll see that it's back and has the new IP address configured. Now we can go to a browser and enter the IP address of the camera and log in with the default username and password, which are admin and admin. Here we have some configuration options and some very basic controls for the camera. We'll go over those more in depth in a future video. Finally, to get your camera up and running, you'll need to get the video image out to something. So let's look at connecting your camera to your computer or video system. One important thing to be aware of here first is that the output resolution and frame rate from the HDMI and SDI output are determined by the rotary switch position on the back of the camera. There's a chart on the bottom of the camera that tells what position to select for the resolution and frame rate that you need. Why is this important? First, the default setting that the camera comes in is in the 4K position. So if you connect the HDMI out to a TV that doesn't support 4K, you're not going to get an image. You'll need to set the output to something in the 1080 resolution range. Also, if you're connecting to something like a Blackmagic Designs ATEM video switcher, they're very particular about the incoming video signal matching the video standard that is set in the switcher. So for example, if the ATEM's video standard is set to 1080p 59.94, if the rotary switch is set to anything other than 1080p 59.94, you won't get an image from the camera to your video switcher. So be mindful to set the resolution and frame rate to a setting that will work with your video system. The USB output works independently from the rotary switch, and its resolution and frame rate can be set by the software you are using on your computer. When you connect the camera to the computer through its USB port, it will show up on your computer just like a regular webcam and can be used in the software of your choice. You could connect the HDMI output to something like the ATEM Mini with its HDMI inputs. I wouldn't recommend using HDMI cables for runs much longer than maybe 15 or 20 feet. If you need to run long cables to your camera positions, the SDI output is great for that. You can run SDI cables up to around 300 feet without any issues. And definitely don't go over about 15 feet with the USB cable. Also, these cameras come equipped with NDI functionality. That means it can send its video signal over a network using the NDI protocol to a device or usually a computer on your network that is able to accept NDI. Hey, if you haven't already, be sure and subscribe to the HoneyOptics channel. As you can tell, there are a lot more exciting features of these cameras to walk through, but I hope this video has helped you get your camera up and running. In the next video, we'll walk through the various ways to control your camera and look at the menus and how to set up things like pan and tilt speed, focus, and zoom settings, and really how to get the most out of your camera. If you have a question or topic you'd like to see covered, be sure and leave that down in the comments. Until next time, bye.